We're um, a little bit behind schedule because of technical difficulties. I wanted to share a PowerPoint with you, and unfortunately, I couldn't get it working. But anyway, I'm today. We're going to talk about the K-1 fiance visa. It's everyone's heard about it. It's one of my favorite visas, and it's really popular, and it's one of the ways, if you have a loved one overseas, it's one of the ways that you can bring that person into the US to be together. So what I wanted to do briefly today was lay out the process, and certain key items to keep in mind, because the K-1 fiance visa is a little bit different than some of the other um, relation or family based visas. So the K-1 visa has three steps to it. The first step is filing the form I-129F. And that's a lot of like numbers and letters, but basically that's the fiance visa form that the US citizen in the US files with the US Immigration Service. So this is actually the most important part of your application, because this is that form is basically the US citizen petitioning for his or her fiance overseas, and this is where you include proof of your relationship. And whenever you're petitioning for a family member, like, proof of relationship is really critical to your application. Um, Two things to keep in mind when you're filing this form, I-129F, or the fiance visa application, is you should include a statement from each of you that you intend to get married when you enter the US. So this is what's different than some of the other visas. This visa allows you to enter the US as a fiance, but you have to get married within 90 days. And it's 90 days of entering the US, not when you get your visa overseas. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is you have to prove that you met in person in the last 2 years. And you would have to provide evidence that you actually physically, met in the last 2 years prior to filing the application. So that's the first step of the process. The second step is, after you file your petition, your I-129F petition with the US Immigration Service in the US, after that's approved, it goes to what's called the National Visa Center. So any applicant living overseas, that application has to go through the National Visa Center. So they're kind of the clearinghouse for all applications with applicants located outside the US. So it goes to the National Visa Center. They review it. They they issue like further instructions. It's not hugely substantive. It's more procedural. And then they will package that application and send it to your fiance's local consulate, wherever he or she may be. That's the second stage. And then the third is, once the local consulate receives the application, the consulate will send an email with the list of steps that your fiance has to complete prior to the interview. So your fiance will get an interview day, and then, a list of instructions of all the things to complete prior to the interview. Again, it's more checklist items, like, getting a medical, things like that, police clearances. So that's like the three steps of the fiance visa process. Um, and then what, lots of questions I get. Um, First most common question is then what happens after the visa interview? So after the visa interview, your fiance will get a visa that is good, typically about 4 to 6 months. So your fiance must travel to the US within that 6 month time period while that visa is valid. And then, of course, once entering the US, you have to get married within 90 days. And then after you get married, um, your fiance, now spouse, can file for a green card in the US. Um, and then another question I frequently get is, what are the pros and cons of the K-1 fiance visa? And, honestly, it comes down to just personal decisions. The K-1 is a little more simple, in meaning you don't have to get married and you don't really have to have a formal engagement or anything like that. I mean, you could just decide between the two of you, hey, we're engaged. Let's apply for this. It doesn't have, a formal requirement, as opposed to, of course, if you went the marriage-based route, of course, you'd have to have like a formal wedding ceremony and provide proof of that. So it really depends, what's important to you. So if you come over on the applicant comes over on the K-1 visa, the wedding ceremony would have to be in the US. So I don't know if that makes a difference. So when I talk to clients, they make decisions based on their personal circumstances. I would say two things to keep in mind when you're trying to make a decision, whether to do the K-1 or the marriage based visa, is check the processing times for the I-129F with the US Immigration Service. The processing times vary depending on what type of visa or petition you're applying for. I would also check the interview wait times at your local consulate, because the K-1 visa appointment times may be a lot shorter than a marriage-based visa appointment time. But I will say, I think in general, oftentimes the most expedient route, if you just want to be together, if that's your primary goal, is the K-1. If you can delay your wedding and have it in the US. So that's just an extremely brief overview, like a little introduction to the K-1. Our law firm routinely handles these types of petitions. We would be very happy to help you. If you have questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.